And we're working in gouache. And you can probably start to see, at least I can, is that gouache has a certain look to it where sometimes it gets a little bit chalky or crispy looking. I like that look sometimes, not for everything, but things that happen to be more graphic, I kind of like it. But the colors were a lot of fun, and I get to work back into stuff that's dried, and that's the coolest part about gouache, is being able to work transparently or opaquely and go back in if you want to. So that's what we're doing. I've got the palette over here on the side where we worked up a little bit of our blues and some warmer colors, and then we're adding some of our darker values. And I am not going in with straight black, by the way. I'm mixing some black with a little bit of blue. True black is very flattening, and so I'm trying not to use that unless it's truly just I can't get it any darker and I need that. But I try to mix in other colors as I can. But black does give us a little bit of a graphic quality, and it really makes those darks pop out. And as you can see last time when we started to add the space of the eye opening here, it went, whoa, infinite black. But now that we've worked up some darker values of some cool darker colors, it doesn't seem quite so intense, right? Anyway, let me jump over, see how the stream's going. Hope you're all having a good week. Hey, looks like Ray's in the house. Raider 3000. Thanks for coming by, brother. Hi, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, this piece is coming along pretty nicely. It's going slow. I wish it were a little faster, but I'm trying to show the whole process. I kind of don't want to do the whole, and 45 minutes later it's done. I like to actually kind of take you on the journey, and I stream pretty regularly, so why not? This is going to probably be a couple more streams, I figure, but when it's done, you'll have seen the whole thing and get a chance to see a little bit how gouache works. And you saw it from beginning concepting to finished deliverable art. And that's where we're at. Ray, what you been up to, buddy? How you having a good week? Hope everything's okay in your world. Raider 3000, everybody, a friend of the show, regularly attending and runs his own stream. Some valuable pro tips there. You want some valuable 3D modeling ideas, a good conceptor too. Ray and I once worked together concepting. A good conceptor too, good designer. So mixing in some black here. My gouache I'm using is actually wet gouache, but it dried, and I hate to throw away paint if I don't have to. And the cool thing about gouache is you get it wet again and it comes back up. The difficult part with working with cakes or dried gouache is that you gotta get it wet for a bit and push into it to get that paint moving around like it's wet. Eventually I may have to move to purely wet paint, but I'm sort of in this place where I'm trying to maximize the paint I have without throwing it away. And of course I'm not doing anything like some people like to do a little plastic airtight palette and keep it wet, but I'm so infrequently using it that if I were using it every day, that is what I would do. But right now I'm not using gouache every day, so keeping it wet would only bring about fungus and mold and all those other things when you leave wet paint in an airtight container for a week. So I'm just using the dry stuff. But if I've got more here, if I need to squeeze out some, I will. Okay, I'm getting a pretty good lather worked up here. I'm going to mix in some more of this blue. And, you know, I've got some other colors that are kind of mixing around. I got some violet in here, other kinds of blue. That's okay with me. I like it when other colors kind of find their way into the paint. It doesn't have to be so, you know, paint by number. Sometimes you make some good, cool discoveries too when you have other colors that mix in. So there we go. I've got something that's pretty good. I would consider this like a Payne's gray or like a deep ultramarine blue or French blue, Prussian blue maybe. So I'm going to try to get some darker values into a few of these spots here. I think need it. Now remember with gouache, as you go back into something that's dry, if you start pressing really hard and working a lot of water into it, it will come back up. And that's okay. Just be prepared. You know, for my students who are learning to use gouache, what I hear so often is like, I thought it was set, and then all of a sudden I started to get mud. And that is because you have too much water at later stages, and you're actually bringing back up old paint that is mixing with what you're doing, and it makes it really uncontrollable. And I can empathize. I know that feeling. So I'm going to start coming in here, really slowing down the render. I invite you to turn on some tunes. I don't know what you're listening to. To me, it's slow and low. I got the old school R&B jams going. I don't know, something about those blues on Sunday night. Sunday night blues, we call them around my house. But it's that thing where, yeah, tomorrow's coming, and you don't really want today to end. So you're sort of hanging on and lamenting the music that you gotta face. And that is why this stream can be a really nice place for you to forget a little bit of all that for just a second. I'm realizing I think I may need to add a little more highlight back in here. I think I lost part of my jaw on this edge, so I got to get some highlights back in here. That'll definitely be something I will be addressing at some point. So the question is like, how contrasty do I want to go here? How much of my edge do I want to learn and turn into something else? Getting some shadows in here. At some point, I'm imagining there will probably be some reflected light back in here. This is a reminder, a little bit of what I'm also trying to do here, for those that have been kind of paying attention maybe a little bit. I am also trying to create the illusion of this being kind of a sculpted, maybe bronze. So I am not painting these objects to look 100% like of the object they're supposed to be. This is not a skull, actual skull. This is a skull that's been sculpted. Now, what I'm kind of thinking is going to be interesting here is how the painterly quality will kind of maybe resemble, and that's the best term I will use, resemble maybe a sculpted look, something kind of chiseled or sanded or something. So some of the choppy brush strokes might end up resembling something like that. I don't know if that's actually going to work, but we're going to try. Kind of deepening my values, and it's interesting. I am kind of sculpting with light and shadow. 3D plants. Ray, that sounds cool. Building some environments, are we? Populating some environments. Love all that organic stuff. I'm not a huge 3D modeler, but I think if I were, I would definitely be into the crunchy stuff. More than I would say do the mech. I think. I don't know. I do like mech stuff too. I do like concepting for man-made objects too. I got this light kind of coming up from below here. My skull is gonna kind of block the light a little bit from over here. And in fact, I kind of think maybe I have a little bit too much warm light over here. I need to tone this down a little bit. I want it to be too hot. More of the light, real heat that we're getting will be landing on the skull from below. So too much. I'm toning a lot of this down. I'm really getting into the details of sculpting now. So that means, and I say sculpting, but I'm painting. All right. So it's really about slowing this down and trying to really be careful about bringing out those little edges that are defining the form. Last time it was more about spot blacks, right? Now it's going to be a little bit more about those transitional edges that really give something dimension. So some of my shadows kind of abruptly stop, and that's what I'm trying to smooth a little bit more carefully. I need to just play some things down too. Like I realized there's a few things in here that are really pretty lit up, and I'm not sure I want them quite so lit up. So like I'm going to tone down a little bit of this background of the sign so that the objects maybe come forward a little bit more. So this is the deets. We are into the deets, people. Cooling it down, making it sit back a little. I noticed that some of this green area back here is really just too warm. It's coming forward, and I want the objects, the three-dimensionally sculpted objects, to come forward a little more. Remember that this is not drawing, as we talked about last time, we are not drawing lines. We are painting dark areas. Lines flatten things, but shadows correctly valued and in the right place can create dimension. That is where we are at. I'm just knocking back some of this background stuff. I might begin to paint a little bit of texture into the edges of the treasure chest, which I think is the working title for this tavern. I think I finally decided. Because that's what we're looking at. That's what's the sign without spelling it out. This is the treasure chest. Okay. Make a little more. I may have to put some yellow back in, or maybe really I think the yellow is resembling the light source, and that's okay. But the local is not going to be yellow. The local is probably going to be a bronzy color, at least to start, which bronze is this sort of deep burnt umber, burnt sienna, kind of a reddish hue, gold almost. It's bronze, right? As a color, we actually call things bronze, but it's a little more along the brownish side rather than yellow. The yellow is probably more an effect of the lighting. So I may have to come back in with some more bronzy browns. But remember, I also wanted to add that aqua greenish blue, because bronze and other metals, when exposed to the air, they oxidize, right? And so they get this built up kind of aqua color. And I'm figuring that this tavern is near the ocean somewhere, so I would want that effect. All right, that's looking pretty good. Got some cool effects happening up here. Got the map. My map is tucked back in here. Toning that down just a smidge. Got this sort of scarfy thing hanging down. Some kind of cool painterly looks that's happening there. I'll definitely be putting some highlight back in there. So every little area that I add now is definitely changing the form of something. And it's all delicately overlapping in here. If I curve this a little bit more this way, then suddenly that scarf changes its shape a little bit. So that's why it's good I got this sharp brush in here to help keep me on target. I have some shadow that needs to come in here from the skull, casting the shadow on the leaf. But I also need to tone down some of this background. Yeah, it's looking pretty good, actually. The values are hitting right because it's really popping. So how was the week, people? Everybody have a good one? I had a super busy week. I was really glad that that last one was over, but I think things are going to be a little more chill this week, I hope. We were on spring break this last week, but I had other jobs that were demanding. So I'm excited to get back into the classroom this week. Even if it is I'm doing mostly, I said last time, more online stuff, but getting back into the online classroom, I guess. Okay, so let's see. Light. Ooh. Didn't want to go in with the black there. So I'm going to scoop that black a little bit and come back in more with the blue. I meant to cool it down, not... I have to get this spider looking pretty good too. Some little details and dimpling around the skin. There's a little hole up here on the skull for the canine. Softening that edge, getting it wet, brushing it a little bit. There's definitely some areas I can tell now where the highlight's going to have to come back in. patch, which I was kind of realizing too. I didn't necessarily dig the way this little piece of the string that attaches the eye patch came too far to the right. I think I wanted to bring it a little bit lower. Let's see if I can maybe make a little change there. Just, I want to make sure it's good and dry. Maybe more like down here. Knocking down some of these teeth. Got some nice shadows on my coins. I don't think I'm going to go in there too much. I think I've got just enough definition. I don't want, it's really weird, but I don't want too much definition, right? This is supposed to be kind of sculpture looking. So I think if I were to define those coins just too much, it just really would not feel sculpted. Put a shadow there behind. I think there's going to be some shadow here on the back of this sword. And I don't really have any reference at this point. I'm kind of making it up. That's all right. I'm going to mellow out the sword just a little bit. But with the idea that it's moving maybe into the light. That leaf got a little bit of curve to it, right? Adding a little shadow, just that little bit of blue suddenly puts a bend in the leaf, right? Those little soft turning edges. That's the kind of stuff I'm blocking in here. A little bit of blue on these. Just nestling those little shadows right back in there. little bit of blue in there. That's looking nice. Getting some nice transition of those values. Laying in with the blue, which is nice because I've got those blacks already in place. A little bit of light in there. Boom. Boom. Yeah, I needed those blacks to really make these blues go to work for me. And now that I do, it's a blast, dude. Try not to get too much water. In fact, as I kind of move forward, I'm using less and less. Scrub there just a little bit, make that transition work for me. I think my hat would cast a little more shadow over here, but hope everybody's doing good. If you want to find me out there, I got my socials right above me up there. But I'm on Art by Trey Gallaher on Facebook, Instagram, Trey Gallaher at Trey Gallaher. Just one Trey Gallaher. I am on Twitter, but I have to say I haven't been super happy since X, so I'm not sure I'm going to continue. And I'm on YouTube. Catch some of these former streams and some other art videos that I do there. A little soft value in there. You see that? I don't know if you guys can see that, but just hitting that with a little bit of blue. And it just turns that edge. And that's what I'm after. I kind of think I got a little too much black over here and I need to get some highlight, but I'm saving the highlights. We're not there yet. We're polishing up the shadows before we move in to the mid and the higher ground. Hit that with a little bit of blue. I think I got to get a little more contrast on my spider over here. I'm thinking the lighter border actually is helping me a little bit frame this. I don't know how much. I need a little separation because I think the light is coming from below and that is definitely illuminating certain parts of this. Like the edge here would probably be pretty bright, and that would mean that the edge opposite it, or this flat edge, would be slightly dimmer. So I don't know if I just need to add more light to this. So I think for the moment, rather than adding a highlight or darkening the frame too much, I'm gonna hold back, even though there's a part of me that totally wants to do that right now. Still gonna hold off. That's the best part too, I think, is that when you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, at least in opaque mediums, is that you're holding off on that highlight, holding off on those highlights, holding off on that specular, even though it feels so good to want to put that specular highlight right on there. Have it feel so easy and contrasty and nice for the eye to look at. But hold off. Hold off. Try to make it work without overdoing it. You know, one other thing I might do here a little bit is maybe soften some of the black too, because if there's any place that's too black, I can hit it with a little bit of blue over the top just to calm it down just a smidge so it's not quite so intense. Pick up some of that black and put it down somewhere else. Cool part about gouache. You can borrow areas of paint. Almost like using the eyedropper tool, no? So what else has been happening? You're all having a good week. You know, it's funny. It's so little paint. It's so little paint. I've got all this squishes of paint over here, but really I'm only adding such a small amount to certain areas, and the impact is way bigger than you think it would be for as little paint as I'm pulling here. I need that black anywhere else. You guys are pretty quiet out there tonight. Ray, you still flying with me, buddy? All right. Thanks, man. Keep me some company out here. Yeah, if you have a question, not Ray, well, Ray, of course, but if anybody else is out there and you have a question about anything or want to talk about what you're working on, feel free to jump in. Chat's open. Water's warm. I realize I get pretty quiet too when I'm getting into this detail stuff. Steady hand and all. There we go. Little curves, little edges to pick up for the eye to use. To define where things end, start, stop, all that good stuff. You know, law of simultaneous contrast here would tell us that I don't need as much dark values on these high edges because the white of the paper right next to it is going to make it feel darker than it might actually be. Now, if you end up scanning it and putting it up against a background of sorts, then you may need to adjust those values. Got my snake there. There's basically three values. There's a places where I'm going heavier black, and then I'm going heavier blue, and then there's this place where it's right in between, mixing these two. You know, gouache techniques, just since we're talking about, you know, gouache techniques. Are we talking about gouache techniques? Yes, we are. Artists in, we'll say, the generation of 50s and 60s and that really got into using gouaches a lot, like illustrators that were using it as a preferred medium, really got good with like pre-mixing their colors. I wouldn't say that gouache is necessarily the best palette mixing medium, but it depends on how much mixing you're doing. Because of the nature of it drying so much, if you do a lot of palette mixing, then you need to really keep your gouache wet all the time so that it's like wet paint, right? Letting it dry and get dry is really challenging, because as it dries, things start shifting a little bit on you, right? And then you got to mix more to get it back. And then the mix isn't exactly perfect or close enough to what you need. So if you pre-mix color, and I don't do this, I don't paint with gouache that much. But if you need exact colors, you want to mix up some so that you have some idea of a color that you're going to use a lot. Even if you alter it a little bit, it's okay. Because if trying to palette mix a color back in gouache can be harder, I think, than other mediums. This is one thing about oil that's so nice, is that oil actually stays wet for a long period of time. So the nice part is you could come back a week later and your paint is still wet. No kidding. Imagine like 5 days later and your paint is still wet on the palette. That's truly flexible. Gouache obviously doesn't have that kind of flexibility, and you can get it wet again and all that, but then now you're having trouble mixing density of paint when you loosen it up again. You add water to get it to come back up to the surface, make it flexible again, but then you have too much water and then you got to add more paint. So it's a little harder to do like a lot of heavy palette mixing with a medium that you have to reactivate and bring up again and mix again. You're mixing all the time is part of the problem. This is why a lot of the great gouache painters really got into pre-mixing some of their colors, because they were whipping these things out, like a lot of the pinup artists, for instance. You know, pinup artists, you know, good girl kind of stuff, where they were like Petty and Vargas and some of those people that were using, you know, brush painting, and they were using gouache. They got so good at handling gouache. It's kind of And if you've ever done any gouache painting and you look at those guys' work and the control they have over where they're getting the paint to do what they want it to do, it's kind of shocking. It's like, wow, it's so controlled. It is so controlled where they're putting paint and how they're getting it to look the way that they do. And you realize that they have a lot of technique to do that. A lot of technique. And that technique is, one, you have an idea of the colors that you like to use all the time. So depending on the subject matter and how you like to work, you might have, like, you might buy a lot of colors that are very close to what you need so that you're doing very little mixing to get them. Come out of the tube, boom, right down. You can get going very quickly and paint a lot faster. Or if you have a complicated color, then you mix it up in advance. So you could pre-mix your colors and get a bunch of it and put it in an airtight container. And then when you need it, boom, you have it ready to go and you can squeeze it out and get going. Acrylic painters did some of the same thing. Illustrators we're talking about did a little bit of this as well. Toning this down just a little bit. We're getting good here. I can feel that the overall piece is really emerging, and I'm digging it. I'm digging it because I've got so much more I got to do to it, and it's already looking pretty good, and I haven't even gotten to the really fun stuff yet, like the highlights and adding more local color. Those are things that are gonna really give it more dimension, deeper colors, deeper values, all that good stuff. Good, thanks, Ray. Be fun to see what you're working on too. I don't know if you're streaming tonight or just, I guess you're probably just watching if you're watching me, right? Love to see what you're up to, but maybe in the Discord. I like to keep in touch with my peeps, see what cool stuff they're doing. Okay, so I think this is going to be a leaf. And I think some of this leaf is going to be in shadow. Got this leaf casting a shadow on the sword. It's funny, it just looks like an abstract shape, but I'm actually trying to get a leaf shape in there. Definitely got to get some shadow over here on this side of the leaf. The leaf kind of makes that V thing, right? One side of the leaf is facing away, one side is facing the light. So it'll curve them a little bit more. Give it a little bit more curvature. So many interesting things that are happening on the surface here. I don't know if you're seeing that, but like I hit that shadow with a little bit of blue and it lifted the black, and then I pushed the black over to another area and kind of redrew it. by moving around the black that I borrowed from the existing shadow. That's the cool thing about this gouache stuff that I think is just electric, is the way you can get something wet, pick it up, move it around, and it dries somewhere else. It's like you're borrowing values. And there's some really cool painterly techniques that start to happen in there as well. It can be maddening too, because if you're not careful, you could be picking stuff up where you don't want to pick it up. This skull is going to definitely be casting some shadow up into my hat here. A bit of more shadow into my coins over there. I think I need some blue. One other thing I was gonna say too, and I realized that like anything, you're only as good as your materials. And I think that is especially true with paint. Cheap paint, when you're learning how to paint, I think is fine. Save a little dough until you know what you're doing. But some of these things I'm doing with the gouache here, I'm using pretty good stuff over here. I'm using Holbeins. I like the Holbein gouaches, mostly because of their colors. The colors are really vibrant and kind of electric and kind of shifted to a more modern feel to them versus, like, you know, some really rich earth tone painting, which I like. Like in my oils, which I'm doing more earth tone works. So I use a lot of Winsor and Newtons. But in gouache, I really like the Holbeins a lot, just because I think I just like their colors. They have some really fun, cool colors, and then you can still get some enough of the original, you know, cadmiums and things like that that you kind of hold your palette together. Ultramarine, yellow ochres, things like that. But good quality paint is essential. After a while, you'll hit this wall if you don't, where you're just kind of frustrated because the paint isn't rich enough. It isn't, like, the fact that I am able to take a wet brush and you can't see it, but, you know, off here and dab a dry piece of paint, and then I get that kind of richness. That does not happen in just any kind of cheap opaque watercolor gouache that you might buy. And it comes in many different forms. There are times when I love to paint my sketchbook with really cheap gouache. It's fine, it's quick, right? But when I'm doing a painting or something with a more finished look to it, and I need those rich colors, that pigmentation is what high quality paints are all about. Caran d'Ache is really fantastic. I have found too. I haven't used much of their gouache in the tube. I don't know if they make gouache in the tube, but they make gouache cakes. And let me tell you, Caran d'Ache are Swiss colors, and they're known for their pigmentation. They're so rich color. I do some of my plein air painting with those because they're just so full of loaded with color. Loaded with color. So you just hit it a little bit and you get a brush load of color. It's just fantastic. But anyway, the better quality of the paint, the better the pigmentation, right? And it holds up when it dries. So if you're using cheap materials and cheaper paints, it's okay when you're starting, but you might start to find you're frustrated as you start painting with it more and you're getting pieces that you want to be in your portfolio or just better quality pieces and you're working for a client. You want those colors to be juicy. And if you aren't using good paint, you may be unpleasantly surprised that when it dries that richness has kind of been lost a little bit. It doesn't hold. So I'm grabbing the edge of this thing. Just a little bit of water. Soften that edge that's starting to dry. And then pushing it around into the more transparent areas. Gouache is a lot of fun, but it can be frustrating. It was for me when I started. But once I got a grasp on it, I was really had fun. And then you realize what it can do is powerful. Okay, so I got my leaf over here. I think I need some shadow, deeper shadow up there. Because I'm losing the effect of the leaf because I think you don't see the form. Need some shadow on there. 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 Gotta get some nice black going here as I'm gonna hit this spider. And I would never even say to paint fully black anything fully black, but this is a spider that is known for being fully black. So I'm gonna get as dark as I can. I also want that contrast of these legs to pop out. Remember though, the spider isn't the color it's supposed to be. It's not a real spider, it's a sculpted spider. which truly, like I said, having only sculpted in bronze one time, details like this would be really, really hard to do. How you vent when you make the mold, how you vent how you vent all those little sharp areas that stand off of the excuse me. I don't know that I like the angle of that leg. I think I like the leg to come down a little more. All right, we got a little patch job we got to do here. So where am I? Oh, for my own convenience, I move my paper towel around. Of course, I forget that I move it around. So I've got some funky stuff happening on this leg here, right? It's not looking so hot. So I'm going to get it wet, dab it, pull it up a little bit there. And when I come back in here, there you go. Fixed. One thing I notice about spider legs is that, and I'm no expert, but what I've noticed is it rarely seems like any of the legs are doing any of the exact same thing. I'm pushing in here with a little bit of water, getting that. A brush can put paint down, but a brush can act like a sponge. And I can pull those legs back up to where I want them to be. So I think I'm going to come back in here this time. Well, let it dry so I can get a nice clean start here. I'll let that dry and I'll come back in on it a little bit later and fix it the way I want. Maybe next time when it's really had a good chance to dry. Get this other leg a little bit. This is dry, so. That's good. Yeah, good. We're good. We're good. It's all manageable. Nothing is really messed up. You just have to know the properties of the paint so you know how to move things around to get them the way that you want. I think I'm about up for tonight. Didn't have very long. We're cruising at about an hour, so I'm gonna probably start winding down here this trip. Trying to think, is there any place I need to make sure I get some color on? Because I wanted to get some color on this thing everywhere. Any place blindly missing some obvious values. I kind of think this snake over here still is a little, some blue back in there. It's gonna drift into these highlights, but I don't want the highlights to be that hot. So I'm going to tone them down a little bit with a little blue over the top. Eventually, one of the last things I'll do is try to put some texture in on this snake. And it would be like texture that the artist would have carved or grooved into the surface to give it a little scaly kind of quality. That's what I'm thinking, at least. But right now, I'm just getting the values to kind of match the three-dimensional qualities. So the face is catching some light, right? I think I'm going to darken the tongue a little bit too, because I'm picturing that this tongue is going to break. When I sketched this originally, I wanted the tongue to create kind of a counterweight. The counterweight of the spider and the tail on the other side. I needed something that just kind of came to the edge here. I've got some heavier lines here around the sword, which I'm now trying to kind of lose a little. And actually the earring actually seems to have some heavier line. So how do I get rid of the line? How to diffuse a line? You get an area that's really contrasty and has the feeling of a line. That means you got to paint the shadow that represents the edge of the dark area out so that it isn't so linear. So any of these little edges in here that I kind of felt like a line, I gotta soften them out, carry them out a little farther, and take away that power, that hard, that line. To get a good tip going here. I don't know what happened. I think when I scrubbed. Love that. Winsor Newton. And Series 7, according to them, is not even like their best of the best, but I feel like it has survived the generations of people finding the Series 7 and being like, you know, it may not be as expensive as some of their other models, but man, it's a powerful standby. Man, I'm doing the old school jams in my head right now. My ears. I hope you're listening to something good over there, Ray. Please tell me you're not just listening to me in silence. I think I'm best with a little music on in the background. Hey, that's what I'm doing in my headset, so I think I'm particularly good with old school jams, old school hip hop, jazz, Miles or Coltrane. Little Vince Guaraldi, maybe. Okay. A little more dimension out of those things. It's noodling time. But I gotta put this puppy to sleep. What do I got over here? What is this, a leaf? Oh, geez. I realize I got one more leaf over here, guys. So, all right. Gotta create this one half of the leaf over here. So many little negative spaces in there. All right, the leaves are looking pretty good. And I think I've got most of these under control. The foliage. I'm going to dab a little bit of that half. All right, my people, thanks for flying with me tonight, or day, or whenever it is that you joined me for this sesh. Looking forward to doing it again, moving this thing along. I don't know. If this thing doesn't get moving a little faster, I might have to do some work on it outside of stream. I don't like to do that. I like to show you everything, and I save this time to use this to work on this. And I don't really have time right now to put into this thing outside of stream. So I don't know. I think we're doing pretty good. Let me get some fresh eyes on it in another day or so and figure out how far we've really come, how far we really have to go. It's definitely dimensional now, and I think my colors are working pretty good. And this snake is coming together, and I got some nice highlights in here. Tone this back just a little bit over here. Pushing things back, bringing other things forward. It's funny, like when I don't see this thing and then, or I'll pass by it, I kind of keep it off to the corner during the week, working on other things in the studio, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I got to remember to do that. Fresh eyes are important. That's what we call it, fresh eyes. That's that place where you leave it alone for a couple of days, your brain kind of forgets all the little things you were working on, little passages of paint, little areas of rendering you were working on, and you forget it. And then you come back and you look at it and you see it almost like for the first time. And you're like, whoa, what was I thinking? I completely missed that other area over there in the corner. Wasn't even paying attention to that. So, yeah, fresh eyes it's important. It is important to the overall effect. I've got some highlights coming out nicely, and I can tell that I'm getting ready to go to the middle ground and the highlights, because as I kind of squint and look at this, I can see, oh yeah, highlight, 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 right? This edge, that edge. You know, things are that you know you're getting close when you start to see. Somebody once said to me, and I've always said this in my classes too, grad school, you can really learn so much by narrowing your view, squinting and looking at your works. The guy who told me, he said, you could eliminate grad school altogether if you just learn to squint when you're looking at your work. But I think the message there is your eye lets less light in and sees only the bigger jumps in contrast and not all the little stuff. So it simplifies it down to kind of the base design. Little shadow there. I think this leaf over here is supposed to be casting. Those little shadows are so critical, and gonna let that spider dry up there. I think I know how I'm gonna end this here. Just end it already, dude. Go to bed. It's getting late. I'm going to end it with a little bit of blue, because I'm seeing a couple areas that just need to be toned down. Smidge, like this little area here. Like the map that's tucked back here, I think needs to be brought back a little bit. It's a little too contrasty for how far away it is. I think I have the edge of my sword here. Make that highlight pop. Go darker right up against the edge. All right. Law of simultaneous contrast. Painting in a nutshell. Painting in a nutshell, law of simultaneous contrasts. An area looks lighter next to an area that is darker. And those are all the games that your eyes are playing. With color, rods and cones, all about edges against other edges. You can define form. It can create perspective. It's all about that. There's a few things in here I want to fix, but they'll be fixed in the highlight because I just can't do it. Like I want to fix this string on the eye patch. I don't need this other string that was there before. But I can't paint it out until I'm into the highlight, so that's going to have to wait. I need to add that jaw, and I can't do that until we're lighter. Yeah, there's definitely some highlights I would want to fix, but I think right now this is about where it's going to be. Be a little bit of these gem edges, which they can't be transparent. They look like gems, but they're opaque because they're bronze or whatever metal might work better. Sculpted, they are not actual gems. They just have to have a form of gem. Probably need to knock some of these gems back, to be honest. These edges that are and I think that's where I'm going to add a little bit of blue. Shadow. All right. A little bit of blue right on this gem, and that's it. Done, done. Done, done, and done. I know I'm dunning a lot, but this is it for real. I'm going to add some blue here. Knock these edges back a little bit. These planes of the diamond, which are all away from the light. So they aren't really transparent. So none of that light is going through. So they got to get more weighty, softer. All right. Gonna leave it. Gonna leave it right there. Digging it. Thanks for hanging with me. Remember to keep your passion in front of you. Make time for it. Even if it's just a little bit each day, little sketchbook, maybe just jotting down some ideas that you might get to at another time, but make some time for that passion. Keep those dreams in front of you. It's what it's all about.